Welcome to Re-Review, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing Fanboys. It was released in 2009, directed by Kyle Newman. It stars Sam Huntington, Christopher Rodriguez Marquette, Dan Fogler, Jay Baruchel, and Kristen Bell. This movie gives us an epic journey of the ultimate Star Wars fanboys trek to Skywalker Ranch. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 13-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. I feel like I have to open this up with the most obvious question here. Star Wars or Star Trek? What is it, guys? Fess up.
If I'm being 100, it's Star Wars.
There was like a pause there. I heard it.
No, same Star Wars.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Star Trek's good and all, and there's a variety to choose from, right? I feel like Star Trek's one of those franchises that anyone can find their Star Trek. I'm very much in the Next Generation with a tidbit of Voyager personally. The J.J. Abrams are fine for what they are or whatever, but I'm more about the 90s, and later and early 2000s Star Trek. But I do appreciate that. But at the end of the day, I got to go Wars.
I'm the same way. I like Wars. I do actually. I do like the Star Trek movies themselves too. Maybe not the first one so much, but 2 through however high they went up, 12 or whatever. And then what was it? They said all the odd ones were not good or something. But no, I liked them. But I'm definitely like more of a Star Wars guy, and I kind of related to the idea of fanboyness kind of a little more than I want to admit, I think.
I mean, isn't that the thing? I was about to say you both failed terribly. Take away your nerd cards. You needed to choose one. You have to be on a side, hardcore, based on watching this film. I mean, I love that they leaned really, really hard into sort of that quintessential dedication that people get to for everything. Gosh, it's sad to say, but there always has to be, if I'm a Star Wars fan, there has to be some contrast, something that they're pitted against, and it happens to be Star Trek. And I loved how much they played off of that. If I'm going to answer, it's Star Wars as well. That seems actually kind of easy, comparing all the stuff. Maybe I'll even take Phantom Menace over. No, I didn't say that out loud.
No.
But having all of that up front and center, I mean, I just enjoyed seeing it because it's really poking fun at how ridiculous we all get about our fandom in like the best way possible.
Yeah, this movie was actually, it's funny watching it. It in a way, because this was 2009, so obviously this was before the purchase by Disney. So the sequels didn't really exist. It was what 3 or 4 years after Revenge of the Sith.
It did say this is episode 7, right?
Yeah, but it's kind of the time period it's representing is obviously very 90s, but it's also kind of, I feel like the last time that I feel like the fandom was truly innocent, I guess, when you got the pure excitement for the franchise. I don't remember being as divisive back then when it came out. Now, obviously when it came out, that splintered everything, but before its release, I feel like there was all the hype in the world and everyone was excited, and I would drive by the theater and there was a line of people in tents and sleeping in lawn chairs and stuff like that, waiting for the movie to come out. And then it came out, and then that's when everything changed, I think.
But I want to give a little bit of context for the history of when the movie actually came out, because the previous movie was not out since 1983. So what is that? 16 years in between. So it's definitely like in between. It's the dog days, like there's like, it's not like it is now where you can go to Target and see Star Wars, or go to Walmart and see Star Wars, or go wherever and see Star Wars. Like there was nothing Star Wars. So if you were a Star Wars fan, it was kind of like you were in like a little pocket, and it wasn't as mainstream as it is now. You can find maybe like a Star Wars magazine at a comic book store, but it was the dark days of Star Wars. There was nothing in between like 1985 and 1996 or 7.
Is that really? I mean, you're talking about that specifically and looking at what Disney has done overall. is that just the consumerism winning out? Because you're right. Now you go everywhere, you see everything Marvel, you see everything Star Wars, you see everything,
No,
everything.
like my 10-year-old mind would have just blown a gasket thinking that there's a whole bunch of movies out. There's TV shows. Basically everywhere I go is Star Wars. Like you could buy everything Star Wars you want. You can buy like Star Wars clothes, like all the toy sets or whatever. Like none of this existed essentially through a vast majority of my childhood from when I was very, very young till like nearing adulthood. Like now I'm freaking old as hell and there's all this awesome stuff and I'm like, gee, I wish I would have had a freaking DeLorean to take some of this stuff and understand what was happening when I was 10 years old.
Oh, but you could buy a DeLorean Lego set now for a really expensive amount of
Yeah,
money because they know you're an adult, so they're coming after you.
you couldn't do that back then either. Well, yeah, now I'm like making up for my absentee childhood.
I mean, that's the thing here, and that's what I was really enjoying is sort of giving into that part. I mean, hell, that's sort of what drives this podcast a bit is just kind of being a nerd about the things we enjoy. And we'll get into the movie now. We have our main characters, Eric, Linus, Hutch, Windows, getting together at a party, and they can't help but come in as Vader and stormtroopers, except for Eric, who's we'll talk about that in a moment. And they end up getting into an argument over, the validity of if Boba Fett is cool. I mean, that's quintessential nerddom, right?
Through and through. I mean, that's the kind of discussions me and my friends had, right? I see myself in these characters. I could probably like sit there, look at them and be like, oh yeah, that was that friend. That was that friend. Those are the conversations we had. I don't know if we argued the validity of the relationship between Luke and Leia as a romantic relationship, but we did have conversations about the Death Star and how it was blown up and, Boba Fett and, the lightsabers and, there's a lot of relatableness in those characters and the conversations. It felt legitimate in the way they portrayed. And I give them credit. Those 5 minutes established the characters very well. I feel like I understood exactly who they were within those 5 minutes, not only what they enjoyed, but their individual personality traits. None of them, they all have a common interest, but none of their personalities overlap so much that it felt like they were the same character.
Except for Eric. Can I say that Eric bothered me?
I think that was the intention, I think.
I do, but the whole time I just wanted to find out why he had to stick up his ass. And I feel like it never panned out. It was just, we stopped being friends because we graduated high school, basically.
He had the whole father problem, right?
Was it his problem? His pops just wanted him to take on the family business.
Yeah, he didn't want to, and I guess he felt the pressure, and it sounds like he thought that he had to grow up, and his friends were just holding him
But
back.
I feel like there must have been something, and maybe this was a cut scene or something that might have explained what happened. There must have been something that happened in high school that triggered that event from happening.
A 3-year gap.
I don't think it was just his dad hiring him because I feel like something may, it's one of those things. I'm sure we all hit that wall or whatever, right? When you look at the thing you're proud of and you think you have a future with, and you're like, oh, this is just actually mediocre compared to, I don't know, maybe he went to a Comic-Con or something and was like, hey, here goes my art. And like, yeah, you're not going to make it, kid.
But I think that's why I had the hard part, because you mentioned, you look at Hutch, Windows, even the Linus character. I was all in on their group dynamic, and him feeling off, but then kind of buying into the journey. It felt a bit abrupt to me. Look, I ran with it. I get it. I get what they were doing, and he had to have his change of heart and kind of buying into the thing that he originally was. But this is always me. I just want a little bit more. Now, I don't need this to be a TV show like other films, but I could have just asked for a little bit more on Eric just to kind of understand why he was such an asshole to his friends. Because I hated him for how mean he really was to these guys.
Yeah, and it was for a good chunk of it too.
I thought he was just a good part of it was him just basically just feeling like they were immature and that they needed to grow up.
So you agree with that sentiment? People should grow up?
No, I mean, not necessarily, but I do think that there is a stigma that comes with being I mean, maybe not anymore, but there was a time when people used to leave their house, leave their parents' house and not just live in their parents' garage. and then
Carriage. Was it carriage? Is that what he kept saying?
Carriage house.
Carriage his carriage house, and move on and try to, which he did at the end of the movie. So there was a process for him.
Now, because I didn't know the full dynamic, and we'll get into a little bit of the dark part here, what Linus, the character, he was dying from cancer. Was I a little bit messed up in that when they told him that, I didn't necessarily believe them because I thought they were just trying to get him on the journey?
Well, he didn't look sick.
No, he didn't, and I can see where you're coming from. That it was a ploy, like it potentially could have been a ploy. I think that if it hadn't been Windows presenting it, I feel like the way that Jay acted that scene sold it more, where like it wasn't coming off as that. Like I feel like he really brought the emotional connection to it. The fact that, he was dying, and that, I think the best line was, I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, it's not about you. Right.
Yeah.
Your squabbles, whatever, everything you're going through, whatever, you need to get over it, because this isn't about you. This isn't. And I think that...
You're right. I think I was staring at Hutch the whole time. Anything. Okay, so we'll talk about... We went through that. There was a lot of old tech. You know me, and I love the old tech in the movies. We saw Nintendo 64. We did have some qualms about Windows and his nerdery. He brought a laptop to a party, which we saw with the Zoe character who we were introduced to, Kristen Bell, who normally these type of scenes, and I was immediately thinking of like the Can't Hardly Waits and all the like teen type movies from the late 90s. I assumed she was the popular character, and somehow they knew to show up at this house. I did not know that she was also going to be a nerd at this point. So I was very confused by that dynamic earlier on, but he had a laptop and he was looking for a phone jack so he could plug in and use his modem. I don't know. That was endearing to me.
He had a tough book.
Panasonic tough book.
Yeah, that's not something that you think about too often.
I will give this movie credit where it's a period piece, right? It's very much set in the 90s. I feel that through the scenery, the clothing choices, the music, and things like the tough books and whatnot, I feel like it put me in the time period of the 90s without being too egregious. I feel like there was a couple moments where it kind of crossed the line a little bit, but... You
mean it wasn't Captain Marvel where they crashed into a Blockbuster with a True Lies?
No, and even their mention of Blockbuster, it didn't feel, too out of place. And I can't remember, 2009, were they still around? I can't remember. They might have been just then going out, but yeah, no, none of them felt out of place. And some of the stuff that was kind of minor, I feel like there wasn't too much technology in this. I don't remember a flip phone coming out at any point, or even a car phone.
Well, what was that thing that they had the countdown on?
Oh, Palm Pilot. It was a Palm Pilot. Yeah. I'll be honest. Those displays were a little bit too crisp for a Palm Pilot. I had a Palm Pilot. It did not look that good. They must have had like somebody's uncle worked over there, and they got like the 3-year advanced version or something.
You want that old kind of like grayscale green and gray or whatever it was. That
I want it to look like a TI-83 Plus. That's what mine looked like with that dot matrix screen.
Well, I mean, okay, we could talk about the lack of tech and not having a GPS. The idea that they're traveling across the country to get to Skywalker Ranch to do this epic heist. I mean, this movie was pulling in everything you've seen in every other film. They had all these set pieces of them visiting all these different areas to create scenarios just to eventually get to their endpoint. As we walk through those particular things, we have the bar that they end up dancing at, and they meet. And of the many cameos, I feel like, was this the first one we really saw with Danny Trejo? Was that really the kind of first one that we were introduced to?
Oh, you mean it's like a cameo?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Maybe it's not even a cameo because it's not. He's in there for a little bit and he has enough lines, I guess.
Yeah, and it's funny because we do have the cameos of actors. I mean, he wasn't related to Star Wars or Star Trek at this point, so he would just kind of come in and kind of felt like he was more relevant to the setting more than anything else.
Mhm.
Yeah, not at this time, but what's crazy is that a bunch of the people who are in this movie ended up being in Star Wars properties
Yeah.
later.
So they probably
A
got to
big
live
amount of
their
them.
lifelong dream of actually making it into one.
I wouldn't be shocked if that's how they got so many people involved. They're like, "Hey, we're making a fanboy movie about Star Wars," and
Okay, so we'll just run off the names because there's a lot here, and if I forget any, please also include. But we've got Billy D. Williams, we've got Shatner, we've got Carrie Fisher, Ray Park, Seth Rogen, Will Forte, Kevin Smith, Craig Robinson, Jason Mewes. I mean, there were faces. You see them, and these people ended up being much bigger in comedy later. You know, if you think of some people like even Will Forte or Craig Robinson and what they ended up accomplishing later. So it's kind of like just like wow, there's a lot of people in this movie.
and the funny thing is I think Shatner was the only one who played himself.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else was in it, and they were. I mean, there was even Ray Park. I mean, yeah, he used the like it's mauling time or something like that.
Yes,
when he's breaking it.
Yeah.
But like it wasn't like Ray. He was supposed to be Ray Park or anything like that in the characters. It was only William Shatner who was playing William Shatner. Everyone
I feel
else
like
was
that's fitting, right?
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. And the fact that it is that they got him to be himself in it, and he, it's weird because like when it came to the Star Trek stuff, there was just enough of references to Star Trek
Mm-hmm.
without breaking any sort of copyright things, I guess, or whatever. They had like the generic shirts, and I don't even think they even really called them phasers. I think they called them like phaser guns or something. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
a little bit off brand, but yeah, no, even Kevin Smith, they never actually, he's dressed like Kevin Smith and he's with Jason Mewes, and the implication is they're very much Jay and Silent Bob, but clearly not at the same time. So there's just all those kind of little callbacks and moments. And, obviously with Carrie Fisher, with the callbacks to, You're My Only Hope and everything else.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, again, what is it? Fan service, just nonstop fan service, one after another.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seth playing multiple characters. How'd you feel he delivered on his Star Wars character and or his pimp character?
That was interesting, especially considering that they face off at one point.
Yeah, I was wondering if they're going to get them both, together in a way that you could clearly see him twice, but I don't think they really did.
No, they didn't. They didn't have him in the same shot.
But it was interesting, to be fair. It was having him being an extreme, because he was an extreme Star Trek, right? Like, whereas I feel like the fanboys in this are fanboys and they're obsessed with it, but it's to a manageable level. Whereas the Star Trek fans, they are like 11 on the scale as far as their nerdiness, I guess. And he was just kind of like king Star Trek nerd. And then we got, what crap? I can't remember. Roach was his name it was Roach. And then he rocking all the tattoos and stuff, which felt kind of weirdly out of place. But nowadays it wouldn't be that weird. If I saw a pimp named Roach having a Jar Jar Binks tattoo, I'd be like, it's not the weirdest thing I've seen.
The peyote guacamole scene.
Oh,
where they all get high. I was having vibes and callback. I was just thinking of Three Amigos and them sitting on the fire, even though they didn't actually get high there. You just think of every time they have someone around, like a drum circle going, they're having peyote, and then they're going to go through an experience just so they can get their car tire fixed. We're going through all these motions because we have these characters who are really trying to learn, especially for Linus. That was him really trying to learn how to let go and not be afraid of what was coming. I think, they made it very funny.
It was a well done usage of visuals and sound effects. I think it peaked and was like the moment when they had Windows laughing and it was Salacious Crumb. I was like, yes, I was all in. I'm fine with the light speed and the Ewok humping, but the Salacious Crumb laugh, I was like, yes, I'm in.
I think you mentioned this, and I guess I want to ask, and I know this is your question, Bobby, but I'm gonna have to lean in here. With everything you mentioned with them not getting close with the Star Trek stuff, how did they pull off all this licensing shenanigans?
Well, in this case, there was some fair usage going on. There was unofficial approvals by Lucasfilm and George Lucas. They actually did film in parts of Skywalker Ranch, so they had participation. Um, you know, I don't know if I would have wanted a George Lucas cameo in this or not. I don't know how I'd feel
I
about
was
that.
wondering if it was going to happen. I really was.
I don't know if it. The man behind the curtain on the phone moment might have been a little bit better. I think it might have been a little bit much if he would have shown up.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, they had enough buy-in from the team so that they were allowed to use the sound effects. They were allowed to, film a couple of scenes at Skywalker Ranch. I think his exterior, the patio, a couple of common areas, the vault and the trash compactor and all that was not part of that. That was all sets that they set up, but they had enough where clearly they didn't have that same sort of connection with Star Trek. Clearly,
I mean, you get something that is such a like an homage film to people enjoying these movies and being in their geekdom. How does someone make something like this again?
I think it'd be tough.
but are you talking in the sense of like a remake, or are you talking about like the same kind of formula but for some other fandom?
And maybe maybe still even this fandom. I mean, is this it? Is it? It'll be another 30 years before someone tries to remind them how much they love Star Wars in this way.
Is it the opposite? Is it some fanboy trying to prevent The Last Jedi from coming out instead of getting a
Oh
sneak
boy!
peek?
Oh,
No.
I went there. I went there.
that's so loaded, so absolutely loaded. I want to.
I mean, I do think that there's something about this movie that made me feel connected to the characters in a certain way. I mean, I think that I kind of related to them in like a scale of 1 to 10. I was like at a 3. Like all their stuff was like really bombastic, and all my fandom was much more minimalistic, kind of, so to speak. But I did really like kind of understand where they were coming from, and I remember the excitement about thinking like, "Oh, there's a new Star Wars movie coming," and I've never sat in a theater and heard people cheer when the opening Star Wars fanfare stuff comes
Mm-hmm.
on in a movie theater, and it's just like exhilarating. So, I mean, I do kind of, it does make me feel a little bit nostalgic, and I'll like, feel right there with them. And I think it would be interesting to try to see that again in a different context.
Is it a different IP that would do it for you?
I think that's probably the only way you could do it.
Maybe like Marvel stuff or
But
Superman
like,
or something. That's the only thing I think holds
what in recent memory has had that amount of hype? I mean, the only thing I can think of is The Force Awakens has had that amount of hype
Mm-hmm.
behind it. I mean, I can't remember the last time I've seen people camp out for a movie. I mean, that's something I think kind of died out in the early 2000s. You really don't see that. I mean, they don't even really do midnight releases anymore. Now
Yeah,
you
they
watch
really
at 4 p.m. the day before,
no.
Mm-hmm.
and maybe
Yeah.
you might stand in a line, but you have your seats already reserved. So you really don't have to. You can show up, miss all those half an hour of trailers beforehand because you already watched them on YouTube anyways.
If you're listening to this in the future, he's talking about going to a physical place called a theater.
But what's interesting is I feel like with sequels, there's more and more sequels where there's just massive gaps in between the sequel and the original movie, like 20 plus years or whatever, like Top Gun or Coming to America. It's like, Bill and Ted, it's like 30 years in between the original movie and the next one. And it's like, we're here for watching these sequels.
I mean, you are getting into what, like you said, mentioned built that hype cycle. Since there was such a gap, it's almost worth asking, like, what is the appropriate time for a sequel to change it? Because you're right, now we're inundated with it. You're right. There's so much Star Wars. There's so much content that it's like maybe we're overwhelmed. If they put more gaps in between, would you feel better, more anticipation building for the next thing?
I'm trying to think of what came out like 30 years ago that doesn't have a sequel yet that I would be interested in. I mean, there's certainly stuff.
Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
I mean,
Eh,
Willow's gonna have a TV show.
oh,
The
that is
crickets. The
true. That
crickets.
is true. Yeah, I don't even know. Like what I that's a good question. I think that's a good question for us and for the people listening is like what property would you want to see 30 years later a sequel made to, a remake, or I don't know, a remake would be tough, but that you think there would be hype behind. I don't know if there
Or
is.
maybe what property deserves like an homage like this. That's something that does give you all those nostalgic feelings and takes you back.
I mean, there's a lot of cartoons that are being remade, like Ninja Turtles and Transformers and stuff like that. Like, there's been rumors about a Masters of the Universe movie coming out for a super long time.
I just don't know if they have the same kind of fandoms that something like this had to have
No,
to
they
have
don't.
fanboys that would have tattoos and be willing to break into a building to see a movie 6 months early. Good intentions aside, yeah, I don't. The only other fandom I can think that's that obsessive is Doctor Who fans.
No, no. I started thinking, would the Lord of the Rings nerds fall under this?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't
Maybe the
know.
Harry Potter kids?
Oh, maybe you come back with that sequel and
Yeah,
you
maybe.
actually have the gang old without all the bad makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Maybe.
That
Yeah.
actually would be a hell of a kicker to have a Harry Potter movie, 15 years from now?
Yeah.
I guess we'd all watch it.
I want to switch gears and ask you guys real quick. What did you think about the ending scene with where they're watching the movie and the dude wasn't there? That kind of hit me a little bit more than I was expecting. I
Really?
was like,
It
"Oh,
was for me. I
yeah."
was
Like
kind
I
of
was
like, oh, he passed away, but we didn't get to see any of it
right. No, that's. I mean, I did think that too, but then I was like, "Oh, he's not really there." You know, like that's kind of sad. But
because they cheers to him. That was kind of the indication we miss him, right?
Yeah, that's true. I feel like it was kind of hard because I think the moment that sold it for me was probably the moment where it transitions. It fades from
Mm-hmm.
him closing his eyes at the campfire and transitioning into Eric the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like any feelings I might have had after that was probably less because of just the jokiness of everything going on and some kind of rough language being used that I don't think is necessarily appropriate nowadays.
no,
Might have kind of ruined it a little bit. But I think that moment right there, the transition was him just looking at his friends from a distance, and then it just kind of fading in the music. I think was really well done to sell that. And then yeah, him not being there. I think it would have hit even harder if they would have had an empty seat next to them.
I kind of thought that
Yeah,
was coming.
that
But I mean, do you think it might have worked, or maybe not with the tone of the movie, but do you think it might have worked, like, if we actually saw him sick, like, saw him, like, have a scene where he's, like, losing hair or whatever, or is it
No,
just
that's
because
that's
just throw
that
off
would
the
go
tone
that's
of the
that
heavy.
movie?
that goes way in the wrong tone. I think.
That is heavy. You definitely got me thinking about it, but that's not what changed
Well, I
this
mean, in
movie
the beginning, they
dramatically.
said this dude's dying of cancer, that's the inciting incident here.
Maybe I'm gonna be glad now that they kept it very, very light and didn't have us actually like feel the weight of all that. But yeah, it's there. Yeah, it's sad. Um, thanks, Bobby.
You're
Now
welcome.
I get to ask you outright, would you recommend this movie?
I think if you have a fandom, then there's something in this that will relate to you, whether it's Star Wars or anything else. I mean, you might be a little bit offended if you're a Trekker, but
Matt, what do you say?
My message to Trekkies they can still enjoy it. I think. No, I actually think that you could probably enjoy this movie even if you're not necessarily have an extreme attachment to a fandom. I think it's actually a fairly well put together movie. I think
Mhm.
the pacing was good. I think the comedy was good. I think that it had a great cast. It had a great cast of cameos. Um, I think that the character arc and the story being told was solid. So I think you can just watch the movie, and plus it's under 90 minutes. So it's a solid evening movie. I think.
Yeah, I think getting the popcorn, laughing quite a bit, and just kind of looking at yourself in the mirror and realizing that you probably have that thing that you're obsessed with, probably have more knowledge than anyone else about it, and you really wish you were going to more trivia nights so you could answer all the questions. Man, they had a lot of trivia scenes. Just to remind you how much these were nerds.
I felt like such a nerd that I can answer all those questions.
And I think
hated
that's the
that.
key part, right? I think that's what brings that bit of enjoyment. And you kind of want things that you relate to, especially when you see it on the big screen. It makes you feel a bit human because we're all a bit this way. So I am saying definitely watch it. If you can stream it, buy it. It's definitely worth watching. So as always, thank you for listening, and remember, nobody calls Han Solo a bitch.